Hola y bienvenidos a otro video de Greener Side Language Academy. Hi and welcome to another video from Greener Side Language Academy. Today we're going to be starting off a very important series, very pertinent to the time, because it's going to be focusing on the CSEC Spanish exam, in particular paper 3, that's the oral exam. And today we're going to be taking a closer look at those general questions, or as CSEC calls it, the guided conversation. Alright, so without further ado, let's jump right in. So before we start, here are some tips and reminders. Now, unlike for the other sections of this exam, which are the situations and the reading passage, you will not have any time to prepare any of the questions that the examiner will ask you. These questions are unseen, meaning that it would be the first time you would be interacting with these questions. You'd receive these questions on the spot. There's no way to prepare other than doing what comes next, the next step, which is start practicing with past papers. So whereas you might not be able to get the questions in your hand and prepare them in advance, you can practice with past papers, and that will give you a good idea of what to expect on the exam. Now, the next thing that I would encourage you to do is when you're in the exam, you need to use a wide and varied vocabulary, and that's definitely gonna come up again. The use of vocabulary determines a lot of the times your level in the Spanish language and how comfortable you feel using it. But I'll go a bit more in depth as it relates to vocabulary as we progress. And the next thing is that we must use the mark scheme and syllabus as a guide when preparing. CXC has provided it for us free of cost, easy to download. All you do is to type it into Google and you find it. So please take advantage of it, because that is where we find out exactly what CXC expects from us. All right. So some more tips and reminders. Don't panic if you don't understand the question at first. I mean, I know it's almost natural for us to panic and freeze and choke up if we don't understand what we heard. We start to panic and we start to get nervous. No, that's not what we should do. What we need to do is to approach it a bit differently. You're gonna listen for everything, and you're gonna try to hear everything, but listen especially for your key words. The first key word I would say you need to listen for is your interrogative pronoun. Is it que? Is it cuando? Is it donde? Is it cuál? ¿Cómo? Right? Listen for that, because that's gonna determine how you respond to the question, because you're gonna know exactly what is being asked. And then another thing that you should listen to is the verb. What's the main verb of this question? That will help you to kind of understand the rest of the question as well. So I'm not saying that these are the only things you should listen for, but these are the key words that you should hear. All right. And then, as with any normal conversation, I mean, even in a conversation in English, if you are asked a question, sometimes you have to take a few seconds to reflect on the response you wish to give. Now, it's the same for the oral exam. You can take a few seconds to really think about how you want to respond, but you don't want to hesitate for too long, because that will be interpreted as a lack of comprehension. And we'll see how that plays out later on as we look at the mark scheme, why we don't want that to be interpreted as a lack of comprehension. All right. And speaking of hesitation, if you want to fill those awkward silences, use space fillers. Every language has them. Just like English would say, well, or something like that. In Spanish, you can say pues. That's the equivalent of well. In English, you have bueno. It really means good, but it's like you're starting your sentence by saying, okay. So, like when you say okay, and then you start to say something else. Here's one if you want to kind of stall, examine a bit longer. Esta es una buena pregunta. That's a good question, right? And this one I find to be very helpful. Déjeme pensar. That is the usted command that means let me think. That way the examiner kind of gets the idea that, okay, might understand my question, but just need some time to think. All right, so, and there are other expressions that you can use as well. You can look them up in your own time. And the next thing has to do with repetition. I would encourage you only to ask the examiner to repeat if you have totally missed the question, right? Because as we're going to see in the mark scheme, if you ask the examiner to repeat too often, it will contribute to a loss of marks for comprehension, because it will be interpreted that you did not understand the first time, so you needed me to repeat, so you have to be careful with that. But if you totally miss a question and you need it to be repeated, go ahead. In that case, you need to address the examiner in Spanish. You can say, repita por favor, and the accent isn't supposed to be over the I for repita. That's a typo, but the expression still applies. Repeat please, that's in the formal usted command form. And then we have no le escuché bien, I didn't hear you well. All right, and then the last one is a question. ¿Puede usted explicar? This one means, can you explain? And this one I kind of like, because if it's a case where we didn't understand the word that was used or an expression that was used, at times, the examiner will find an alternative way to ask the question, maybe change around a word or two so that you can understand, using, of course, vocabulary that you understand. So that can happen sometimes, so you can use that expression to kind of get the examiner to rephrase the question. All right, so let's take a look at the mark scheme. So when it comes to the mark scheme now, this is the most valuable part of the exam. This is where the bulk of the marks are. For the guided conversation, it's 45 marks in total, and you're marked on the basis of your comprehension, spontaneity, and fluency. So you have to show that you readily understand. You have to answer spontaneously, without, it seeming like you have to really think hard to answer a question, And of course, fluency, meaning that your words flow, you express yourself with little hesitation, if any at all. All right, and then you are marked on the basis of your correctness of expression and what? Range of vocabulary, of course, within the limits set by the syllabus. So you need to ensure that your grammar is on point, your pronunciation is on point, and you should have a wide vocabulary. Let's focus on the outstanding and very good. Now, on the comprehension and spontaneity, which is marked out at 20 marks, if you get between 18 and 20 marks for this section, it means that you understand all questions and you answer readily. No hesitation at all. You just answer, you're like, I wouldn't say like a machine, but it just means that your level of Spanish as it relates to comprehension and readiness of, responding is on point. All right, so you'd want to aim for this, because this is where you'd want me to get, the highest marks to score as highly as possible. Now, if we scoot a bit over to the right and look at the column, which is entitled Expression and Fluency, which is out of 25 marks now. If you get between 23 and 25 marks, it means that you would have responded appropriately, very appropriately, and fluently, meaning you're answering the question correctly and your response is not disjointed or, staccato, like, yo soy estudiante en la no, you don't want that at all. You want to be very fluent, speak clearly as if you know what you're saying. That is definitely in the top tier of marks, right? And of course, we get the correct expression, so that grammar is correct, accurate, maybe just one little error, if any at all, right? And you're using wide and varied vocabulary. In the next band now, we have very good. And I mean, even if we don't get the outstanding, it's good if you end up in the very good band, right? Because that means that your level of Spanish is still quite good for the level, for the CSEC level. Now, at 15 to 17 out of 20 marks for comprehension and spontaneity, it means that you comprehend most questions fully the first time. So this is where the repetition comes into play. It's possible that for this part, maybe you would have asked the examiner to repeat maybe once or twice, maybe 3 times, but that's pushing it. But, that would be the band that you end up in if you ask for a lot of repetition or you ask for a bit of repetition. As I said, maybe 1 to 3 questions, right? And you would answer with minimal hesitation, means then that you're going to be answering quite readily, and even if you hesitate, it's not that often that you do. So that is also something that you can aspire to. On the side entitled Expression and Fluency now, if you get in between 20 and 22 marks, you're responding, appropriately and fluently. Maybe not for every question, but for the majority. Your expression will be correct, so your grammar is going to be on point, but every now and then you might have a bit of an inaccuracy, right? But your vocabulary must still be wide and varied. So you will see from these top 2 tiers what is important to the examiners. I'll leave the link in the description. So thank you so much for watching today's video, everyone. Don't forget to leave a like, to share the video with your friends, and to subscribe to Greener Side Language Academy. Hasta la próxima. Adiós.